Thanks, Comrade Chair. Dramatic events have unfolded in Minnesota over the past month or so. Trump sent in 3,000 masked ICE agents, which is a special division of the federal police force. And we saw these ICE agents rampage people's apartments and homes, launch vicious attacks against people and taking some of these people and interning them. And we saw two extrajudicial killings, one of Renee Good and one of Alex Preddy. Now, Marx once said that sometimes the revolution needs the whip of reaction. I'd assume that Donald Trump never read that quote, but he basically unleashed the whip of reaction, and it caused a tremendous upsurge in Minneapolis. On January 23rd, there was a day of a general strike and a day of action. There are estimates of 50,000 to 100,000 people participating in that. And yes, it was limited participation, but still, it was the first citywide general strike we've seen in the United States in 80 years. And I think it's the first general strike that's occurred in Minneapolis since 1934, when the Trotskyist-led Teamsters Union led that strike. Now we have to ask ourselves, what's behind Trump's attacks? Why is he doing this? Now we know Trump cannot deliver on any of his promises on the economy. The economic problems in the United States are a result of the decay of American capitalism. None of Trump's tariff policies is going to bring that back. Less people are employed in manufacturing now than when he came into office. Inflation is still high. And according to Trump's own figures, which frankly, I don't think we can trust, the real unemployment rate is 8%, higher than last January when he came into office. He's unable to deliver on the economy, and he needed something to distract the attention of the American people. And I know nobody's probably heard this, but there's another scandal going on regarding the Epstein files. Trump opened up that can of worms, and now he can't control it. He also needed something to distract people from that. But Trump, for a long time, has been trying to use immigrants in the United States as scapegoats. The first thing I want to mention, by the way, is that when we talk about immigrants, a lot of the people who are immigrants in the United States right now are not simply immigrants, they are refugees. American capitalism always wanted cheap immigrant labor. That's how it grew. And they prefer to keep these people in a precarious position. In other words, they want to keep them as so-called illegal. Why are they coming to the United States in droves? Because U.S. imperialism and world capitalism has not been able to develop Latin America, Africa, large parts of Asia and the Pacific, and develop those economies so that people could provide a decent lifestyle for them and their families. In fact, they're in a desperate situation. They're drowning in poverty. 44% of the world's population lives on less than $6.85 a day. Is there any wonder why people are trying to save themselves, to go to places that look relatively prosperous? So Trump tried to use this cultural war, this attack on immigrants, as a way to divide the working class, to make the workers stop thinking of themselves in a class term, but start thinking of themselves based on where they were born. It's this us versus them mentality, that they are bringing the poverty, they are bringing the crime. So he launches this cultural war and attacks workplaces looking for people who are so-called illegal immigrants. But in attacking these workplaces, he actually turned the cultural war into a class war. Now, Trump, what he's doing is absolutely reactionary, and we completely oppose to all of his policies and everything he's doing. But these events have posed some questions from the movement. Many people have said, is Trump a dictator? Is he a fascist? And I think we should answer these questions carefully. Trump is definitely a different kind of president, that's for sure. But is he really more violent than past American presidents? You know, the bourgeois state exists to defend the rule of the bourgeois. The bourgeois state comes down to ultimately to armed bodies of men. There are different forms of bourgeois states. There are dictatorships, there's fascist states, and there's bourgeois democracy. The United States has been under a form of bourgeois democracy for about 250 years. But even the most democratic bourgeois democracies are very repressive. It's a state apparatus. It exists to repress the masses, the majority. And I would argue, if you look at the American bourgeois democracy, it's one of the most repressive states in the history of all these bourgeois democratic states. And there's nothing qualitatively different between Trump and past presidents in that respect. You know, last year, 2025, they estimate that 1,314 people were killed by the police, which is almost 3.6 people getting killed every single day. You're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. You're supposed to have a day in court. These people were killed before they were arrested. Okay, so that's the number last year under Trump. What was it in 2024 when Joe Biden was president? It was actually a little more. It was 1,365 people killed by the police. I don't have the time to go through an entire history of repression under the U.S. democratic state, but I'll just mention a few things to think about. For example, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is revered by liberals, by reformists, and by Stalinists as some great president in the United States. For more than 3 years, he interned Japanese Americans, including American citizens, in internment camps during World War II. They were not arrested. They didn't go to court. They were thrown in these internment camps just because they were of Japanese descent. When this was challenged at the Supreme Court backed Roosevelt's policies. Funny, nobody calls FDR a dictator. Nobody calls him a fascist. We don't think he was a dictator or fascist, but this is how repressive American bourgeois democracy can be. During the civil rights movement in Detroit in 1967, there was an uprising by the black population in that city. The police, the National Guard, and even the U.S. airborne troops, military, was sent in. The government killed 43 people, injured 1,189, and made over 7,200 arrests, as well as destroying 400 buildings. This was done under Democratic President Lyndon Baines Johnson. In 1985 in Philadelphia, the liberal Democratic mayor, Wilson Goode, authorized the police to drop a bomb on the home that a cult group called the Move lived in. Supposedly, the city was worried about how the Move cult was treating its children, the children who lived there. Well, they dropped the bomb, and they killed 6 adults and 5 children. In addition, 61 houses, more than 2 city blocks, were destroyed, and 250 people were left homeless. All done under bourgeois democracy in the United States. I could go over many other examples. I won't get into like the Rodney King uprising in Los Angeles in 1992. But I think when we look at what Trump is doing, we should look at it in the context of what the American state has done in the past. I think we should use these movements and use these struggles to explain to people, where do democratic rights come from? But even those Bill of Rights in the Constitution was a byproduct of struggle, was a byproduct of the American Revolution. The end of chattel slavery came about because of the second part of the American Revolution, the Civil War. The right to fight, to found unions, and the right to strike was achieved by the struggles of the working class when all those things were made illegal. Women gained the right to vote because they struggled to fight for that right, and because in 1917, the Russian Revolution gave women the right to vote. 2 years later, they finally give women the right to vote in the United States. 2 years after the Russian Revolution. The civil rights movement had to fight and struggle. People faced water hoses, dogs, killings, to bring an end to Jim Crow segregation and to fight for the right to vote. The bourgeois state, in general, does not give rights. It tries to take rights and limit rights. The battle for rights comes from the struggles of the population and the working class. It's the working class that has to battle to defend and expand the rights of the population. I would also point out that, if we did have a question of a fascist dictatorship in the United States, there would be a process that would put fascism in power. You'd have to mobilize paramilitary forces made up of petty bourgeois, lumpen elements. And then these right-wing paramilitary forces would smash the organizations of the working class, smash the unions. Now, is the bourgeois able to do that right now in the United States? I'll let the comrades from Minneapolis, they could talk about that fascist got what happened to him when he decided to protest in Minneapolis. But even aside, even if they had the forces to do it, I don't even know if the bourgeois would want to smash the trade unions right now. The trade union leaders play an extremely important role in holding back the struggle of the working class in the United States. So I don't think, we should go along with that idea that Trump is a fascist, Trump is a dictator. But of course, we're completely against his reactionary policies. And as we saw the events unfold in Minneapolis, the class balance of forces are well on the side of the working class. And even without a good, strong leadership, we have seen a partial victory against Trump. We've seen him defeated. Trump was forced to pull out Bovino. He was forced to pull out Nome. And now he's announced that he's moving most of the ICE people out of Minnesota. That would not have happened if the class balance of forces were not so in favor of the working class. That would not have happened without the determination and the fight of those people. But we have to say it's a partial victory because, after all, Trump is still in power. And this was a defensive struggle, but not an offensive struggle. And if we had larger forces there, Marxism would want to turn this defensive struggle into an offensive struggle. Now, we argued that what needed to be done in this situation is action committees should have been formed in all the neighborhoods and all the workplaces. Now, the purpose of those action committees would be to defend people in the neighborhoods, defend people in the workplaces, but that each of those action committees should have elected delegates that could meet on a citywide, or in the case of Minneapolis, St. Paul, a twin citywide basis. Imagine a meeting like even bigger than this, where you have representatives from thousands of workplaces and neighborhoods sending delegates into one concentrated position. In a certain sense, that would have become, basically an embryo of a Soviet. Now, when the general strike happened on January 23rd, it was partial. The two labor federations, the Minneapolis and the St. Paul Regional Labor Federations, they have tens of thousands of members, but they really didn't organize to shut down like the airport, construction, mass transit. But if there had been this kind of citywide collection of delegates from the action committees, this entity either would have forced them to do something, or it itself could have directed the strike action. And this movement could have taken it from a defensive movement into an offensive movement, fighting for jobs, higher wages, organizing unions, more housing, rents capped at 10% of income, and the fight for free universal health care, which we don't have in the United States. These are the issues, the lack of high-paying jobs, lack of health care. These are the issues that Trump uses to divide the working class. The movement must go on the offensive to fight for these things. Now, there were many committees formed in many neighborhoods and workplaces, but it was not linked up. There was no leadership arguing to link these committees up. There's 3.7 million people that live in the Twin Cities area. If there had been a revolutionary party that would have had at least 2,000 members in that metro area, I think things would have been completely different. But we were not big enough to be able to play that role. Still, the comrades will come in and explain what we did do in that situation, how we did argue for things. I think Minneapolis, in the end, will be a great learning experience for the development of the Revolutionary Party in the United States. Yes, we recruited members, but what's more important is that we're learning from this experience. Lenin said, revolutions are festivals of the oppressed. Movements like this have elements of revolution in them. With the right leadership, it could have become pre-revolutionary, at least in that city. We're going to use these rich lessons to educate our comrades because there are going to be many more such battles ahead in the future. We will build our forces, and we will aim to play a much larger role when things like this open up in the future. Thanks. Thank you.
So, comrades, January 7th was a watershed moment in the American labor movement. It was the first time I heard the word general strike uttered by an average worker who, until that day, likely did not even consider it as a possibility in her lifetime. But sometimes things develop at a breakneck speed. In the mid-afternoon, I received a phone call from a comrade about a vigil taking place to honor the life of Renee Good, who was brutally murdered by an ICE officer in cold blood. I had just heard what happened and felt a burning rage as I got ready for the intervention. We did not expect it to be very big, so we did not mobilize our full area. Rather, we decided to only send a few people to scope things out for safety purposes. After all, if it isn't that big, it's very possible that ICE agents could try to harass the protesters that do gather there. Even before this happened, we were already planning on releasing a video for our social media about ICE in Minneapolis. Now, it felt more relevant than ever. Once we did arrive, with the leaflets we had on hand and a few papers, we realized we needed a lot more people. It was just me and 2 other comrades. Thousands of people gathered in the street where Good was murdered to remember her, listening to speeches and discussing amongst themselves what we must do to fight back. A comrade got up on an elevated platform to see how far it goes. They could not see the beginning nor the end of the mass. During this time, our area executive committee in Minneapolis was monitoring events and saw live footage of the size of the protest and quickly realized we definitely needed to send more people into the vigil. The mood was electric. People kept filing in. Everyone not only felt anger, but also felt a burning desire to act, to do something to honor the memory of one of their own and fight back against the terror of ICE in Minneapolis. This murder occurred less than a mile away from where George Floyd was murdered around 5 to 6 years ago. And the folks present had not forgotten about that. Just like George Floyd, many people saw themselves in Renee. They understood that it could have been any of them, and even if it couldn't, it could still have been someone they know. Their mother, their sister, their aunt, their spouse. They knew if they kept quiet, the terror wouldn't stop. In normal times, everyday workers despise confrontation. They may feel that they can't afford to revolt lest they risk losing what little they have. But in moments like these, that changes. The sentiment of feeling you can't afford to revolt turns into a feeling that you can't afford not to. That's what we saw that day. People were ecstatic at the perspectives we were putting forward. Most agreed that in order to fight ICE, we need a revolution. This is in the land of McCarthy, where the ruling class has vilified revolutionary politics to an extreme, but a growing layer is doubting these lies. One person said, unprompted, that we need a general strike. It was never easier to talk about revolution. This movement picked up where the George Floyd uprising left off, where in 2020, they organized themselves into neighborhood self-defense committees. In 2026, that call reemerged, along with a call for a general strike. But there were 2 other moments in the vigil that stuck out to me. One moment began rather violently. A car barreled through the street, threatening the lives of many protesters, including myself and my fellow comrades. We immediately hopped onto a snowbank to get to safety, but one of the people that had to evade the car was a contact we had just spoken to about our perspectives on how to fight ICE. This contact immediately got up onto a snowbank and began agitating with those same perspectives. He said the ruling class has us fighting amongst ourselves, just like this, he gestures to the car, when they are the real enemy. This is a class war, and we must fight back through our organizations to drive ICE out of Minneapolis. He then directed the crowd towards us, saying there are people here with great propaganda, and that everyone there must speak to us and educate themselves on the ideas that will liberate them. This person ended up coming to a branch meeting. A comrade was then asked to help a different contact to build a barricade, and if they didn't, this person would not believe in the ideas of our organization. We have to understand here that in times of class peace, or relative class peace, it is us applying pressure on our periphery to activate them in the building of the Revolutionary Party. But in times of class struggle, we find that it is the contacts who put that pressure on us to solely build the movement instead of the party. We must, in these times, remember that the role of the Revolutionary Party is to connect all movements, not build up one or two in an impulsive way when they arise. Shortly after that, we started walking away from the vigil. The paper had practically sold itself. All we had to do was hold it up. We were fresh out of our leaflets, had made 18 contacts between the 3 of us, and were feeling quite satisfied with what we were able to do with our limited forces. But the workers were not finished. As we were walking away, we heard more chanting and were surprised to find that there were more people than we thought that remained at the protest. Enough for a mass march through the streets of Minneapolis. We saw them pass by and flirted with the idea of joining them, but decided it was better to preserve our energies for the next action. We understood that night that this was the start of a mass movement. There would be no shortage of opportunities for us in the future. We turned to each other and said, this is open season for the communists. It was clear that the old leaders did not have the control they once enjoyed over the movement. The masses were moving on their own and coming to advanced conclusions on their own. Whatever the balance sheet of the movement turns out to be, and I think our comrade Owen will have more to say on that, what is unquestionably true is that for the first time, workers were not only talking about class struggle methods to oppose ICE, but neighborhood committees and patrol groups as well. A growing layer of them had no illusions in the Democrats. They have set the tone for the American labor movement, raised the bar for the tactics we can use, and when the next social explosion does arrive, the workers are beginning to become conscious of their own strength as a united class. No matter the result of this particular movement, however partial the victory at the end, no one can take that away from them. Thank you, comrades.
Merci, camarades. Comrades, what exciting times we're living in. I'll cut right to the chase. I'm going to provide some updates on the ICE Out movement, and I will go over some of the key lessons that we have learned through participating in it. First of all, I'd like to say that the uprising in Minneapolis over the past few weeks is really a preview of events to come. Wide layers of the working class have been drawn into political life by the movement. Trump's brazen actions have revealed for all the naked violence of the capitalist state. People have also seen the inability of the liberal Democrat mayor and governor to protect immigrant workers. As a result, workers drew their own conclusions to take matters into our own hands. During the process of this struggle, the capacity and the creativity of workers has really been displayed. As outrage swept across the city, so too did self-organized efforts of the workers. Mutual aid organizations sprang up out of nowhere. Many churches, schools, and small businesses became donation centers. Hundreds of volunteers have canvassed for events and opportunities to get involved. And nearly every neighborhood has hosted ICE patrols. You can go anywhere in Minneapolis and see volunteers in safety vests, armed with radios and whistles on street corners. And after ICE agents entered a high school, parents started forming protective chains around the schools. High schoolers have been some of the most radicalized by these events. Almost all of the high schools in Minneapolis have staged rolling walkouts against ICE terror. I was, in fact, just reading an article about a high school in Indiana, which continues to host weekly walkouts against ICE. ICE vehicles are also being tracked in real time by mobile ICE patrols. These people have taken on the moniker commuters. The commuters have formed a database of ICE vehicle license plates. I witnessed one of these commuter patrols firsthand. I was sitting down in a coffee shop with a comrade when everyone else in the store got up out of their seats to go look out the window. Roughly 5 or 6 large SUVs drove by full of ICE agents. And tailing them were 10 or 12 cars full of people reporting on their movements. They had headsets on and everything. It was really quite the sight. I think one of the most important developments of this movement has been the self-organized neighborhood committees. They started out as signal group chats, but moved very quickly from online spaces to in-person activity. And as Athithi mentioned, their origins can be traced back to the self-defense committees after the George Floyd movement. These neighborhood meetings quickly covered the entire city and became very well attended. Through the escalation of events, they were transformed into environments for political discussion on fighting ICE. At one of these in-person meetings, there were 1,000 people in attendance. It was held at a high school, and the comrades who attended reported walking down the halls and seeing all of the classrooms filled to the brim. These are the effects on a population when it becomes intensely politicized. It's not for certain if these neighborhood groups will stick around as the movement ebbs, but they have left a lasting impression. And what we've seen here are glimpses of the capacity for workers to run society themselves. I remember driving through Minneapolis and seeing all of the ICE Out signs and graffiti. I turned to the comrade in the car with me and I said, it feels like we're living through 1/10 of a revolution. As Tom pointed out in the leadoff, the largest obstacle for these neighborhood groups has been its lack of coordination and leadership. Without revolutionary leadership, the working class is forced to learn through trial and error. Because of the discoordination, each neighborhood was fighting ICE terror by itself, essentially. Now imagine if each neighborhood committee had elected delegates to a citywide coordinating body, and the unions could have linked up with that coordinating body and laid out plans to escalate the struggle. Strike committees could have been formed in all of the key workplaces that ICE needs to operate. Through coordination, the gas station workers could refuse service to ICE. The hotel staff could refuse to house ICE. The airport workers could refuse to transport the deportees. This is the power of the working class when it's organized, but right now it only lies in potential. The unions are the only organizations with the reach and resources to access this potential. The largest federation of unions in America, the AFL-CIO, they represent 15 million workers across the country. They outnumber ICE agents 680 to 1. The entire working class outnumbers ICE 7,500 to 1. The question of capacity and coordination is a question of leadership. I want to speak now on the general strike. It was really the energy from below that pushed faith groups, unions, and small political organizations to call for a day of action. The union organizers in particular avoided the word strike. And I'm not being dramatic here, but every single person I talked to in the lead up to that day called it a general strike. They called it what they wanted it to be. On the day of the strike, January 23rd, it's estimated that between 50,000 and 100,000 people marched through downtown Minneapolis. Nearly 800 small businesses closed down for the day. Of the people that participated that day, 38% did not work. These are workers who either took the day off or their employer had closed due to the mass pressure. Without any real example of what a general strike means or looks like,
Donc, sans vraiment avoir un exemple de qu'est-ce qu'une grève générale veut dire ou ce à quoi ça ressemble,
and without leadership pointing the way forward, workers were driven to general strike conclusions. This represents the organic class instinct in every worker. This mood for class struggle was displayed most concretely and recently in Minneapolis, but it exists across the country and across the world. This mood is evidence of a larger shift at play. We are leaving behind decades of relative class peace and entering an era of social upheaval, mass movement, class struggle, and revolution. The class battles ahead of us will be larger than anything we've experienced thus far. The general strike on the 23rd sent alarm bells ringing throughout the bourgeois media. 60 of Minnesota's CEOs petitioned Trump to de-escalate, not because they care about immigrants being terrorized, but they care about the stability of their system. And even without decisive leadership, the potential power of the working class was on display, and it towers over Trump and the capitalist class. These CEOs could see what lies further down the road of class struggle and what this movement could have grown into. The working class was on a trajectory to come into direct confrontation with the entire ruling class. There was potential for the union leadership to be pushed out of their passivity, and there was a real possibility of a wave of strikes that started in Minneapolis and spread across the country. I want to give you all an indication of what sort of governor Minnesota has. Last Tuesday, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, met with the head of ICE operations, Tom Homan. Walz said that he wants to return to a lower number of agents, the about 100 to 150 who regularly work in the state. The Democrats are also afraid of the instability to their system. They don't want ICE out of Minnesota. They want ICE out of the news headlines. So there's this question of what has the role of the RCA been in this movement in particular? We aim to show the potential of movements, to point out the limits that prevent it from winning, to connect that to the need for a socialist revolution, and the urgent task of building revolutionary leadership today. With the forces we have in Minneapolis, we weren't able to play a leadership role for this movement. It is a difficult thing to not be a major player in the game, to know you have the correct ideas and not have the size to implement them. It is also frustrating to see a movement ebb before your eyes and know exactly what it needs to accelerate and expand. But we must remind ourselves we cannot shout louder than our own voice. What could we have done with 500 or 1,000 communists across Minneapolis? And this is not too far away, considering we just crossed 1,000 communists in the United States. The conditions for building a communist party in America have never been more ideal. A poll last autumn recorded that 62% of people aged 18 to 30 have a favorable view of socialism, and 34% of these people have a favorable view of communism. Our primary role has been underlined by this movement to unite these radicalized workers and students under a communist banner, with communist cells embedded in every workplace, classroom, union, and neighborhood committee. We could have effectively and systematically put forward communist ideas across the movement. This is a question of quantity, but also of quality. Each of these communists must be capable cadre, professional revolutionaries. They must be trained in Marxism and in the history of the class struggle. Professional revolutionaries are able to connect the real struggle of the workers against ICE to the need for a revolutionary overthrow of capitalism, the root cause of ICE terror. I'd like to address this question of anything we could have done differently. I think we should keep in mind that building during times of relative class peace is very different from building during times of class struggle. And the transition between the two can be very quick and very jarring. There were a layer of comrades who felt the pressure of the movement to, let's say, join in building barricades. Simultaneously, there was a layer that took a more routinist approach to branch meetings and outward activity. The pressure of the movement impacts different people in different ways. We must constantly find the balance between opportunism and sectarianism. We should also remember that our tactics flow from concrete conditions and from the class character of movements. These are both subject to change, so likewise our tactics are subject to change. In Minneapolis, we have recruited 15 people from this movement. The task is now to train these communists in the method of Marxism, to turn them into cadre who can play a decisive role in the future. The Minneapolis comrades recognize how historical this movement has been. The past several weeks have fueled our motivation to build the party, to raise our own political level and sharpen our understanding of events. We recognize how important it is to learn from our experience in this movement, to draw out all the correct lessons, and to transmit those lessons across the international, so that we are all prepared to intervene in movements like this one. This is ultimately why we hold international Marxist schools as this one. The question is not whether class struggle will come. The question is, will we have built and trained the leadership capable of winning? Onward to 10,000 communists internationally.
Well, comrades, I also want to thank Comrade Owen and Comrade Athithi for their presentation. It's very dramatic, but it's an eyewitness, a participant's view of what's going on in Minneapolis. And a month ago, we started with about 50 comrades in Minneapolis. As Owen said, we recruited 15, so now we're at 65. That's a 30% growth in 1 month. But comrades, yeah, it was a lot of interesting questions came in. I want to start, there was one question about what was the difference between this and the Black Lives Matter movement, which happened a few years back, and I guess what kind of overlap they may have had. Well, I'd say in some ways, obviously, the experience of Black Lives Matter had an effect on this movement as well. But I think there were also some big differences. With Black Lives Matter, you had a local policeman who killed a local individual. But the struggle in Minneapolis is actually a struggle against the federal government, against the national government and its policies. I think it's almost like a higher level kind of struggle, political struggle. And also from what I can see in Minneapolis, the character of this movement, it's actually more organized than the Black Lives Matter movement was. And you see that develop when you have a series of movements over time. The future the movements that occur now learn from the past to some extent. Now, on this question of the popularity of the general strike and how that's spreading in the United States, I think what's happening is a lot of people have been under a lot of pain for a long time in the United States, and people want to do something to fight against that. And they're tired of seeing small, isolated battles which don't seem to achieve anything. So that's why people are starting to look to this idea of a general strike, of having all the workers come out. To define a general strike is not just one workplace, one employer, or one industry. It's a call to strike everywhere, shut down everything. In a certain sense, a general strike really poses the question of power. Who runs the society? Now, any indication that by any labor leaders for a general strike we would at least give it critical support. Sean Fain, the head of the United Auto Workers Union, is proposed a general strike for May Day 2028. The reason he did that was when the auto companies settled, when the auto workers settled their contracts with the auto companies, the contract will end on April 30th of 2028. So this would allow the workers to go on strike legally. But the thing is, he's done nothing really to coordinate with other unions trying to, let's say, get their contracts to end on April 30th. It was so far into the future, it was like a very abstract kind of demand. But I guess as of May 2nd, 2027, we can start demanding that the labor movement take up that demand. But the communists should absolutely be putting forward these ideas and should support it. I can't speak for Canada, but in the United States, even a one-day general strike would be an enormous step forward. Because I don't think there's ever been an actual national general strike in the United States. It would be the first time ever if that happened. It would shake the bourgeois for sure, and it would shake the labor leaders for sure. But I don't know how the union leaders are in Canada, but in the United States, every time you go to a union leader, the first thing they start to do is to tell you what you can't do. You can't call a general strike, it's illegal. Was the Flint sit-down strike legal to occupy that plant? The labor movement was built by breaking the law. If we obey their laws, they win. They're the ones that make the law. We say, take up a campaign against the anti-labor laws, the Taft-Hartley Act, which makes that illegal. But this should be an increasing part of our propaganda. It's a way of gaining more support into our ranks. Now, someone asked about how do we deal with the contacts in the movement they were torn from joining a party and the question of fighting in the streets and fighting in this movement. Well, our comrades try to say, yes, fight in the streets. We want to fight with you. But we have to have a strategy that wins. There is a mentality in the U.S. that sometimes if you just do something, that will achieve your goal. But it's not about just doing something, but it's doing the right thing in the right way. People talk about direct action. Yes, we want to direct the action in a way so that the working class will win. This also brings up there was a question regarding armed resistance. I was reading, there's these killer ants from, I think, South America. And when there's a lot of rain and it floods, the ants come together in a ball so they can float on the water. And then when the water goes down, the ants will grab onto a tree or something. Right? They spread out. Then they wait to find an animal or a human who's sleeping. Then they quietly surround that animal or that person. Then they strike, and the animal is paralyzed. That's the way the working class has to fight capitalism. When this comes up, this question of armed resistance, there's a reference to the Second Amendment of the Constitution, which supposedly gives Americans the right to bear arms. We can claim that right, but we should have no illusions that the government is going to protect our rights on that. Look what happened to the Black Panthers in the 1960s and the 1970s. They had the right to bear arms, and the state went right after them. And they were a small force that was not really integrated into the larger working class. So the state was able to pick them off. So before we talk about armed resistance, we have to talk about politically winning over the working class. If we can win over the working class, if the working class can be organized and use its power to stop society, but use it for itself, we know at some time the state apparatus will use its force against that working class. At that point, there are so many of us, we can find the way to arm ourselves and to deal with that situation. But people small groups that start engaging in, what they want to call the armed struggle, divorced from the broader working class, will ultimately be doing the bourgeois a favor. The bourgeois will pick them off and defeat them. And this happened at the end of the 1960s, the early 1970s in the United States. We must learn from history. That knowledge is based on learning from past example. Trotsky said the party is the memory of the working class. That's one of the reasons we have to build the party, is we have to exist as a memory to aid the working class in its future struggles. And I want to get to this question about the U.S. Being, the center of world reaction, and yet the idea of building a communist party in the midst of that reaction. You know, the talk of the American dream, that was the idea that your kids are going to live better than you and your grandkids are going to live better than your children. And for certain periods in American history, that was true for certain parts of the population. But for most people, it's not true now. And that's why so many Americans are angry. The left is angry, the right is angry, the middle is angry. That's why Trump was able to get in there. Everybody's angry. People don't believe the American dream is there for them. And that's why we always have to think about dialectics. One of the things that dialectics tells us is that things can turn into their opposite. So you could have the United States as being the premier reactionary head of world imperialism, head of capitalism. And inside that country, you could have a growing opposition, a growing communist movement. The crisis of capitalism is destroying all the points of stability that created that conservatism in the past in the United States. It's being severely undermined. There's plenty of potential explosions right now in the United States, but I'm going to tell you this. One of the last pillars that keeps some stability in the United States is something called Social Security. In 8 years, it's going to go bankrupt. 8 years from now, they're going to be cutting a third of everybody's Social Security check. That's going to overturn American capitalism, just that. I can't see that happening without there being massive upheaval in the United States. And nobody has any solution. Because if the bourgeois were smart, they'd start tackling this now ahead of what's coming. They're not even discussing it. You know, what is it? The Irish saying, the gods make crazy whom they intend to destroy, right? Is that? First make crazy whom they intend to destroy. That's the American ruling class. The American working class has tremendous potential power, tremendous potential combativity. It just needs leadership, and we're going to build that leadership.